Hello, everyone. We are live now. My name is Kellyanne. I'm a bookseller of Mysterious Galaxy. Thank you for bearing with us. I know we're starting our event today a little late. We're having a couple technical difficulties. Our author today, Nicole Galland, is having a little bit of tech issues, so she's trying to get those solved, but we are also here with our moderator, Neal Stephenson. He is the co-author of The Rise and Fall of Dodo with Nicole, and so he will be in conversation with her, hopefully as soon as we can get those fixed, but we wanted to just go ahead and kick off our event so we wouldn't keep you all waiting. In the meantime, before I pass it off to Neal, I'm going to go over like the little bits and bobs of Crowdcast for anyone who has not been to one of our virtual events. On the right-hand side, we have our chat section, so you can go ahead and say hello to any the authors. Below us, there is a green Purchase Master of the Revels button. That'll take you straight to Mysterious Galaxy, where you can purchase Nicole's book, Master of the Revels. It came out recently, so we're here to celebrate that. And below that button, there's the Ask a Question button. If you click that, it'll open a window where you can type in any question you want to ask Neal or Nicole. So make sure you do that. The great thing about online events is that you can ask authors all of your questions, and it's a great time. So make sure to take advantage of that. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Neal, and hopefully we'll get Nicole on here very, very soon. Have a great event.
Hi, yeah, so thank you. Thanks for the intro and for setting this up. I'll be a little distracted here because I'm in touch with Nikki via text message as she tries to reboot and get her system going. This is a sequel that Nikki wrote with a microscopic amount of input from me. So it's all her book. She wrote it. It's a sequel to The Rise and Fall of Dodo, which Nikki and I co-wrote a few years ago. And it's set in the same kind of what we would call an IP universe, I guess. And it's it picks up almost immediately after the end of the events that are depicted in the original novel. So, okay, so there's Nikki.
Hi.
Nikki, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, and your audio's in sync with your video.
Fabulous. Excellent.
So I was just starting to explain how this book got written.
Excellent. Carry on.
Well, I thought maybe you would want to say something.
Yes, I would love to. Just give me one or two sentences to play catch up. How far into the narrative?
Just that it picks up immediately after the events that are described in the original book.
Yes.
So it rolls right in.
Rolls right in. It starts days later, actually, and takes all of the same characters, plays around with them. So I'm assuming that what I missed included the basic premise of the first book, so I don't need to explain.
No, I didn't really cover that.
Okay. I don't know if you're being ironic or not.
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. So the books, the books are set in a universe in which time travel exists as an expression of magic, which can only be performed by witches who have been doing magic, including time travel, for a very long time, since the beginning of time. But technology and magic do not comfortably coexist. There's something about increasingly advanced technology, including, for example, photography, that tamps down magic's wavelength in a sense. And so by the time we come to the modern era, magic can only exist in very rarefied circumstances, and the US government figures out how to corral it, magic, with the specific purpose of wanting to use it chiefly for time travel, to go back in time and make micro adjustments that will have a butterfly effect, that will benefit the government, the United States, geopolitically.
So in principle, they'd be interested in anything, any use of magic, right, that would help them, the military-industrial complex, further its objectives. But in practice, since the witches are confined to a little cryogenic chamber the size of a phone booth, with room for maybe one other person, there's not actually that many things that they can do. A lot of the spells that they know how to do might be very powerful if they could do them outside in the general public. But as it turns out, that's a pretty severe limitation. But what they find out pretty early is that witches are capable of sending, with a capital S, people who are in the chamber with them to other times and places. And because it's the Pentagon and everything has an acronym, these are called DTAPs, for destination, time, and places. And so as Nikki describes, what the Pentagon sort of figures out by process of elimination is that the most effective way to use this is to send people back to those DTAPs to make these small adjustments.
Thank you.
Sure.
So one of the things that happens in the first book is that one of the witches who they connect with in another time period, who can help them with the time travel on the other end, the way that magic works. I've just gotten an error message, which means that I may be about to get bumped off again.
You're fine.
Okay. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
You sound like you're about to talk about Grania.
Grania, yes. So in order for time travel to work, the doer, the diachronic operative, that's another acronym, has to be sent at any given moment from one time period to another by a witch. And there's a witch back in early 17th century London named Grania, who, when we first meet her as a spy for Grace O'Malley in London, she is the one they connect with and form a relationship with to send people forward in time. Once Grania realizes that in the future technology is going to have a negative impact on magic, she decides to use the whole contraption to her own benefit and to magic's benefit. She comes forward in time. Some spoilers here for those of you that haven't read the first book. She comes forward in time with the specific intention of reverse engineering everything so that technology doesn't develop enough for magic to have disappeared in the first place. And she manages to take over the mind of the person running Dodo, the Department of Diachronic Operations, and starts to nefariously do this in a subtle way that no one realizes, until the original group of folks who originally figured out this whole thing about magic and technology, they realize what's going on. They sunder themselves from the huge governmental organization that is doing this and become a little sort of ragtag vigilante group trying to prevent Grania from using all of these resources that the American government is unwittingly giving her. So it becomes a sort of a defensive game of chess. At the end of the first book, Grania is in a position to do something that's going to undermine the rise of technology, and our heroes have to go back in time and prevent her from doing that. So that's where this book steps up. This book steps up with Grania having several different plans that she's putting into place all at once. One of them involves Roman Empire era Sicily. One of them involves Renaissance Florence, early Renaissance Florence. In both cases, she wants to do something very slight that will have a domino effect that will be in her interest and not in the interest of anyone that would like technology not to evaporate. And then the other thing that she does is realizing that she is only one person, as powerful as she is, to protect. Yes. But is that for Neal?
There's a third place that she's operating, as well as you mentioned two. Yeah.
Right. And the third one is Jacobean London.
Yeah. Okay.
Because she realizes that she might screw up, and so she essentially wants to leave the residue of her power someplace where other witches can find it. So she decides that she needs to embed a very powerful spell into a place that can easily be found, that other witches can use if something happens to her. And the place she decides to embed it is the original script of Shakespeare's Macbeth, which is a script that has to be approved by Edmund Tilney, the master of the revels, hence the title of the book. So when the book begins, she's got these 3 different strategies in place, and our heroes are running around trying to put out the various fires that she is setting. I think that's a pretty good intro to what it is that is happening in the book. And unless you have something else you'd like to add to that, Neal.
No, that's good. So there's the 3 D taps that you mentioned, and then the fourth time and place that is important to the story is present day Boston, which is where Dodo is headquartered. So the action kind of moves around among all of those places.
Yeah, and it's an epistolary novel, meaning that it's told through a series of letters and journal entries and reports that are filed by diachronic operatives and other people. And so the voices, there are many, it's told in many voices. And because of that, I thought it would be fun as we're reading it to have it read in many voices. And at this point, I need to say to our lovely hosts that there is someone in the audience named Dee Roycroft. And if you can add her to us somehow, if she can be brought in through the green room, that would be awesome. I'm going to continue to talk while we see if that's, yes, there she is waving. He is Irish, and one of the characters is Irish. And so she has shown up from Ireland, where I am as well, where it's 11:22 p.m. just to be Grania for us. So the characters are all essentially telling their version of reality, which includes the characters that you're about to hear from are, first of all, Tristan Lyons, who is the fellow who started the whole thing in the first place. He figured out there was something going on with magic, with time travel, and then also realized that something was going on with Grania. So at the very beginning of this novel, in order to make it very easy for people that have not read Dodo to understand what's going on, he kicks it off with a preface, which, Neal, do you have access to that, Neal?
Yeah, I'm looking at it. You want me to read that?
Okay. Yes. So we're going to start with Neal pretending to be Tristan.
Hi, Dee.
Hi, Dee.
Hi, Dee. Okay, here we go. Okay. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Tristan Lyons, United States Army, retired, and I'm one of several ex-employees of Dodo, the Department of Diachronic Operations, a black ops arm of the United States government that has been taken over and subverted by an enemy agent. Dodo was formed 5 years ago with the mission of using time travel, diachronic operations, to benefit the United States. Its staff quickly expanded from only myself, operational command, Dr. Melisande Stokes, historical linguist, Dr. Frank Oda, physicist, and Ersabet Karpathy, witch, to a sprawling bureaucracy-sogged government agency. Its resources have since been hijacked and misdirected by a rogue witch named Grania, with the aim of devolving human society to a medieval era level of technology. Nobody at Dodo realizes she's doing this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So I just want to introduce who the other characters are before we start having Grania read. But Grania is just about to read, so it would be awesome if she could once again step out from the green room. Along with Tristan is his partner, Mel, who is Melisande Stokes, who is an historical linguist. And the two of them are essentially the two that were most in charge. Grania is the witch who I referred to earlier. And Grania, in the first book, very nearly ended Mel's life, which is something that Mel doesn't want to forget about. So in this version, Grania is writing a letter throughout it to a younger witch whom she's trying to recruit to work with her on her diabolical premise. And this is the beginning of her letter to that witch, Cat. Take it away, Dee. Thank you.
I have determined to lure my enemies, each in turn, to earlier epochs, and then pluck them off one by one. Ha! I have just now come from my first triumph, and flushed with victory I am, having destroyed the eldest of them, the physicist. And furthermore, haven't I accomplished this using the most potent eldritch spell that ever witches wove? Is right, I have. A charm so maleficent that many witches would have banded even when magic was at its apex. Tis just a few lines of chanted verse, yet its effect is so vicious as to resemble diachronic shear, if shear could be directed to swaddle just one human in its fire. I shall explain more in detail if and when you join me. I will be writing you in this missive here the story of how I go about my great unmaking of mankind's great making. That way, when you choose to join me, you may leap into the work with all necessary foreknowledge. I intend to lance the boil from several angles all at once, in addition to removing my enemies, I mean. That way, if my enemies do thwart one operation, still there will be other of my efforts that may yet thrive. I've convinced a sister witch to send me back here to 17th century era, regular like, on the pretext that I need to smell the salt sea air as it was in my youth. There are scant things I miss from the old country, but sure the pure, clean Irish air is chief among them. The smell of the soil and the sea and the gentle summer winds, they tug at me heart. Or so I tell folk anyhow. And true that is. But given the feckin' dampness and rot and cheap stink everywhere, 'tis not enough to really make the journey were there not something greater at stake. I come here only to write the words that will convince you, Cara, to be leaving off your present employment and join me. The queerest thing about my life here now is this. My enemies and I must live within the same city and encounter each other as if we were not enemies. And thus it is. I found myself mere hours ago, face to face with my chief nemesis, the one named Melisande. And where did we meet, of all my places, but within a shop? Upon that broad street, known to the locals as Mass Avenue, although it's not to do with church, there be many large shops selling all manner of goods. One in particular is unique in selling what it does label rare and exotic spirits, although many are familiar quaffs to myself, such as apple wine and stiffer spirits from the Northlands. But they also vend contemporary libations of outstanding merit, and I've arranged to have an unlimited expense account. As I desired to have a nice pour awaiting me after my return from my diachronic errands, I was perusing my options. And didn't it happen that I was not the only one in search of spirits? Indeed, I wasn't.
Thank you, Dee. So immediately after that, what follows is Mel picking up her side of the story. This is a post that she is writing onto the internet among the group that works together now. 20 minutes ago, found me making small talk with Grania in the liquor aisle at Sundry's Groceries on Mass Avenue. My simply writing that what the fuck sentence demonstrates we need to document what happens now. So I'm starting a new channel just to chronicle any and all encounters we have with Dodo personnel. Maybe we'll get lucky and discover some of them are secretly on our side, but let's not count on that. Here's what happened. I'd gone to the pharmacy for a surgical needle to prepare the smallpox vaccination. Since I was so close to Sundry's, I stopped in there to pick up one of their magnum packages of ramen, plus, per Tristan's request, a bottle of Yggdrasil liquor. His baby sister is graduating a semester early, and I was tasked with buying her favorite inebriant as a graduation gift. Her name is Robin. She's in grad school somewhere in New York, and I didn't know she existed until 3 days ago, so don't anyone else feel left out. As I was perusing Sundry's rare and exotic spirits section, I saw a tangle of wild reddish hair at just exactly the right height to be you-know-who, and then the owner of said hair tossed her head back casually in a familiar manner. I felt a buzzing sensation in my midriff as I realized, oh yes, it's our own demented Grania. Here we are in all absurd circumstances in the local grocery store, for fuck's sake, and now what? She couldn't do magic on me here, at least. But what etiquette determines how to address someone who, at last meeting, exiled me to 1851 London? Nice to see you, Grania, would be a trifle disingenuous, while you Gaelic bitch who sent me to end my days inhaling whale oil fumes in a Victorian madhouse might have gotten me thrown out of sundries, and I hadn't found the Yggdrasil yet. So I stood very still and hoped she would not notice me. No such luck. She had just picked up a bottle of Dom Perignon and turned in my direction as if expecting me. Her eyes got very wide, but she smiled immediately. She was not threatened by my presence. She wasn't disturbed. If anything, she looked delighted, which annoyed me more than it should have. For a moment, I thought she was going to embrace me. What she was actually doing was raising her arm to make sure I noticed her expensive champagne. Sure, isn't it Nell then? She said gaily, as if we were passing acquaintances. And a happy new year to you. And then she winked at me. Hello, Grania, I said, trying not to grind my teeth. We're only a few days in, but it's been a pretty good year so far. Celebrating? I asked, nodding toward the bubbly, which was easy to do. She continued to hold it high. What, this shite? She laughed. Sure, this is what I sweeten my tea with. I brushed my teeth with it, so I do. If it was celebrating I was up to, I wouldn't be wasting my time on commercial brands, now would I? I smiled politely over my adrenaline and rage, excused myself, paid cash for the Yggdrasil and the ramen, and ran back to East House. And by the way, there's an unmarked government vehicle parked across the street. So that's Mel's take on the same scenario. And then finally, introducing a new character who was not in the first book, Tristan's sister for whom Mel was buying the Yggdrasil. Handwritten letter on recycled printer paper from Robin Lyons to Melisande Stokes. Dear Mel, if that's your name. Ha! I didn't even know Tristan had a friend. That's so typical. In fact, chances are you're just a coworker laying down a backstory to cover up some covert thing he's doing. That's why I'm writing this in a form that you can burn without leaving a digital footprint. See, Tristan, I pay attention. I don't know specifically who Tristan works for, but I have my suspicions. The thing about my big bro is he's totally lawful good, so I know he's pursuing truth, justice in the American way, and I do love him for that old school ethos. Anywho, thanks for overnighting the Yggdrasil. That was super sweet of you. I'm genuinely touched that Tristan remembered my Scandinavian hooch fetish. And I bet his invite was your idea because Tristan has never once in his life suggested I come for a visit. I hope you weren't intending it as a polite gesture that I'm supposed to know enough to politely decline, because I am not polite and I have no intention of declining. So sure, thanks. It would be cool to meet you if you really exist. And again, seriously, thank you for the Yggdrasil. There's only one place you can buy it in Boston, so now I have a general sense of where you hang out. I promise not to tell the bad guys. Cheers, Robin. And that's that. She joins the team, and then we are off on our adventures. So I think at this point, what's supposed to happen is that we should transition to answering questions. But because of our various technical challenges, we missed getting the info, or at least I did. Neal, do you know anything about how that is supposed to work?
I think they just show up on the little chat window.
Okay. Well, in that case, there are none.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what we do. We could just continue to chat. Am I still in sync?
Yeah. No, you're doing great.
Okay.
So, yeah. So.
There are questions in the Ask a Question box.
In the Ask a Question box.
Oh, there are 4 questions. Look at that.
Oh, look at that. Okay.
What inspired you to return to the world of Dodo with Master of the Revels? What is the most rewarding part of writing this sequel? What were some challenges? I wanted to return to the world just because it was such a fun world to have built out with Neal. And I felt like we came up with a lot of rules for how to engage with the world. And we did not necessarily have an opportunity to sort of explore every single what if scenario. We set up, I think, all the necessary rules. We just didn't necessarily have a chance to test them. And so the opportunity to test them in some ways was fun. And also, it's just such a hoot to be able to write a book where you can check out any time period. I'm an historical novelist chiefly, and So the fact that I could write about whatever I wanted to for as long or short a time. There's one scene in the book, there's two very brief scenes that take place in medieval Kyoto. And because I felt like writing about medieval Kyoto for about that long that day. So there's just, it's sort of like you get to have your cake and eat it too. The challenges were that I didn't get to do it with Neal. We were a really great team. In fact, we joked when the first book came out that we were going to have to invent fights that we had so that we would have something to talk about when people asked us what it was like. It was smooth in a way that makes for really great writing, but not great anecdoting. And I missed that. It was
You missed fighting?
I'm,
Oh, no,
I'm
just
presenting
kidding.
The next question is, what did the writing process differ between collaborating with Neal for The Rise and Fall of Dodo versus Master of the Rebels? There was a back and forth that happened that just wasn't there when there's no one to back and forth with. We have very different ways of seeing the world and challenging and handling challenges. My interpretation of this, but Neal, please feel free to disagree with me if this doesn't match your memory. Neal is an engineer and I'm a theater person. So when there's a problem, I handle it the way you do in a rehearsal, where you sort of go, you know what, that's not working, let's try something else. Whereas Neal's take on it would be, let's figure out what's not working and fix that one thing and then just keep going with what we're doing. So I had a bigger and broader and more flamboyant approach, and Neal had a more sensible one. That was my take on it. I have no idea if that's how you saw it.
Well, I mean, we kind of do different things, and so my role was to sort of do the fake science, the completely bogus fake physics and engineering.
It was fake?
Yeah. But yeah, I'm just a punch it out kind of writer. So, and Nikki is too. I mean, she writes fast.
I write fast, but I angst more than you do, I think. So knowing that there was always going to be this other person to bounce things off of, and then not having that person, it's a hugely different experience. Who was your favorite character to write? They're all fun in different ways. Grania, I think in many ways is, in the first book, definitely was my favorite character. In the second book, she has an agenda. And in the first book, she doesn't as much. You sort of see her discover it. There's this really fly by the seat of her pants energy in the first book that shifts in the second. The one who's going by her seat of the pants more really is Robin Lyons, Tristan's little sister. And it's just fun for me to write those characters, I think, either because I do or do not live my life that way, depending on what day it is. But they're all fun. It's one of the things that's great about an epistolary novel like this is that you get to go into the head of so many different characters. It's like instead of directing a play with lots of people, you get to be all of the actors all at once. Who doesn't like that? Neal, who was your favorite character to write in the first book? We've lost your voice. You are now muted. Are you back?
I was eating. I was eating. Yeah. I enjoyed some of the smaller characters. I think you and I both seem to enjoy writing Roger Blevins, who's the bad guy, because he's just such a despicable person. And Magnus and some of the others.
Yeah, Magnus was fun. Let's see. Let us continue through these questions. What inspired the rules or constraints of your magic system? Were there any particular challenges or research that you had to do to keep the system consistent? I'd like to turn that over to you, at least to start to answer, Neal, since the bogus physics was your job.
I mean, the time travel stories are there's a lot of them, right? And frequently they kind of run afoul of a lot of the same logical contradictions. And so part of what was going on here was an attempt to come up with a time travel scenario that might be free of some of those contradictions. And so a lot of the constraints of the magic system, well, there isn't really a system, but it's because it's never quite explained what they're doing. but the basic, constraints of the world have been set up to deal with that. So magic only happens inside of an ODEC, one of these contraptions. One of the spells that witches can do is send people to other times and places, but there are multiple strands. There's multiple alternate pasts that all kind of vote on what their combined future is. So you can't just go back in time once and make some change and have it take. You have to go back in time to the same DTAP a number of times and sort of perform the same mission in slightly varying circumstances for it to take. So that right there eliminates a lot of the logical problems that you frequently encounter in time travel books. And then you can't do big changes. If you go back in time and kill Napoleon, it creates a kind of a time quake called diachronic shear. And so the changes all have to be these subtle butterfly effect things. You go back to Constantinople 1,000 years ago, and your mission is to open a gate and leave it ajar and come home. Or you go to a tavern in Belgium 600 years ago, and your mission is to knock a guy's beer over and then get out. And exactly how that helps achieve the goals of Dodo is frequently a little bit mysterious. So it took a little bit of thinking and tweaking to kind of get the system the way it needed to be, but I think it did kind of get to the point where when Nikki then went on to write Master of the Revels, that it all kind of worked. There wasn't a need. We didn't have to do a lot of retconning to have it all still work.
Right, that was reassuring to realize that the universe works even when it moves away from its original setting. And the fact of the multiverse is a fundamental element of where those rules come from. That was the impression that I got when you started to talk to me about this. It was sort of leaning into the premise of there being a multiverse that makes magic sort of make sense in this world. That's my one small contribution to answering that question. Thank you, Neal. Next question. Would you advise people to start with Dodo if they have not read it yet? Well, I think everyone should read everything that we've both written. That's the simple answer. But from the point of view of Dodo is not required reading in order to read this one. I think that there are different ways to handle sequels. If you started reading The Two Towers, you'd be pretty confused if you hadn't read Fellowship of the Rings. There's so many fabulous things in The Rise and Fall of Dodo, and there's a number of characters who are brilliant who do not have a star turn this time around. So it's definitely worth reading it, but you do not need to read it in order for Master of the Revels to make sense. I spent almost all of the rewriting that went into this book was to make sure that it could be read sui generis on its own. So read it now and then go back and read Dodo. Which section or scene brought you the most joy to write? Anyone who knows me knows that the answer to that is the Shakespeare stuff. I am such a Shakespeare geek. One of the reasons that a particular part of the first book was set when it was because I wanted an excuse to write some scenes that were set backstage at Shakespeare's theater, and then suddenly I had a whole book where I could do that. So all of the theater stuff, all of the Shakespeare stuff, the rehearsing the play, the way that plays got produced back then. I am just the ultimate Shakespeare geek in the world of sci-fi, I think. If there's someone else who's even worse than I am, I would love to sit down and have a beer with them. Let's see. If you could travel to any time and place, when and where would you go? This is one of those questions that I just don't think anyone should ever ask because it's so dangerous. Do you have a stock answer to that, Neal? Because I don't.
Well, you know, setting aside the problem of disease and violence and danger and all that, you know, I'm interested in sort of London during the time of when the Royal Society was getting going, and obviously I wrote, or maybe not so obviously, I wrote a series of books set in that era called the Baroque cycle. So that's book. Thanks. That's a place where I feel as though I would kind of know my way around. I'd be able to sort of speak the language and sort of understand what people were saying, and there would be a lot going on that would be kind of of personal interest to me.
That makes sense. In that same spirit, Shakespeare's London, you know, from around like mid 1590s to 1610, 1615, that would definitely be my wheelhouse. Although I feel like because I spend so much time there in my imagination already, that also feels horribly unoriginal, and I wish that I had some out of left field answer. Now I feel like I need to create one for the next time I'm asked that, which I'm sure I will be. Next question. Did you do a lot of research for the different historical timelines you wrote about? Did you learn any interesting, fun history facts while writing these books? Writing the books is constantly about learning fun, interesting history facts, many of which, possibly too many of which, have ended up in the books. I always do a lot of research. I actually did a 2-month research trip for Master of the Revels where I just went to all of the places except medieval Kyoto. I mean, I didn't actually travel back in time, but I went to places where I could access the material that I needed. So pretty much any place that anyone walks, not in the 21st century in the book, I walked during this 2-month period of research. And there was so much Shakespeare geekiness that I ended up cutting out about 10 or 12 manuscript pages worth of historical details that to me were totally fascinating. And I thought, yeah, I just think that's probably more than they want to read about. So I took out pages and pages of Shakespeare geekiness. And when our agent read it the first time, her chief note was, you know, you have an awful lot of Shakespeare geekiness in there. You might want to think about taking some of it out. So yes, I learn a lot whenever I write anything, really. And when I wrote a novel years ago called Crossed, A Tale of the Fourth Crusade, where I learned an awful lot about the Fourth Crusade. And in The Rise and Fall of Dodo, one of the key sections that it's set in is the Fourth Crusade, because I had like all this sort of leftover knowledge and angles that I hadn't been able to put into that book. So no historical research is ever wasted, really. There's always going to be an opportunity for it. How many books are planned to be written in this world? Nothing is planned. Things happen or they don't. And I am going to just move beyond that. Thank you very much, Mysterious Galaxy Bookstore, for putting up the link to Crossed.
I mean, Nikki, maybe a thing to say is just that we, both of us, enjoy the world, and it would be fun. I mean, there's an unlimited number of books that could be written in the world. So really it boils down to, you know, is there a deal to be made? And that probably has a lot to do with how this book does in the market.
Yes, thank you. Sure. Neal's my publicist. That's why I bring him along to these events.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. Why do we think the concept of magic and technology not working well together is a common thread in many stories? I think an easy and obvious answer to this, although I would love to hear from you, Neal, if you have a deeper dive on this, is just that we are all wired to believe in magic, but we don't get to see it very often in our world. And what does our world have? It has technology. So it's sort of the obvious fall guy for the reason that it can't be here. I don't know if I said that very articulately, but it's almost midnight here.
I was just thinking there was some stories. I think there were Heinlein stories from the 60s or 70s that had some of this in them, where there was magic active, but it could be directly counteracted by technology and vice versa. So there's just a couple of images that I remember from these stories. Like there's the Tibetans had some anti-nuclear warfare prayer wheels that they kept turning. And so that made it impossible for nuclear weapons to be used in this version of the world. And so other forms of military technology had to be used instead. And I think there was another thing, and I don't know if this is based on a traditional idea or if it's just something Heinlein made up, but it was that the nearby presence of iron would kind of prevent magic from working. I don't know if that's a Heinlein thing, or have you heard of that, Nikki?
Yeah, that sounds familiar, but I wouldn't trust my own memory to say who I associate it with, but that does sound, and there was a reason that makes perfect sense in the logic of the world, but I don't remember what it is.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Can you share how you two met and came to collaborate on the first Dodo book? We met because we have the same agent, Liz Darensoff, who's awesome. And Neal came to know my first novel, The Fool's Tale, because Liz asked him to read it to blurb it, which he very kindly did. And then when Neal and some friends got together to do a multi-author extravaganza called the Mongoliad, the way that I always heard it was there were 6 of them. They were all guys. And a friend said, you could use a little estrogen in that mix. And Neal thought of me. I heard that from the friend who says she said that. So I don't know if that's how you remember that, but I like that version of the story.
Well, it's not entirely hormone based. So it's also just the fact that we were going to be writing a big, sprawling historical epic, and I knew from your work that that was your wheelhouse, and so I thought, well, what would it seems like Nikki would kill this, so let's get her in on it.
Which he did, and I said yes. And then after we all did that for a few years, which was, someone should write a book about writing that book. It was quite an undertaking. As it was wrapping up, Neal had this epiphany about the world that became the universe of Dodo, and very kindly invited me to work on that with him as well. I think you were concerned about the amount of time you had to give it as a solo writer. Is that accurate?
Well, it had been and I think I came up with the idea just all of a sudden out of nowhere on Thanksgiving morning of 2013, and just kind of wrote down an introductory sequence for it, and then it kind of sat there for a while. It's one of those ideas that I've had a couple of these where I'll have the idea and I'll say to myself, oh, this seems like it would be a great TV show or a movie or a graphic novel or something like that. And then after a few years of it sitting around going nowhere, I finally just say to myself, what the hell, I write novels for a living. Why not just write the thing as a novel? And I've done that with a couple of projects, SEVENEVES being another one. So I just happened to kind of come up with the idea of doing that around the time when you were in town for working on the Mongoliad, and it just seemed like a kind of an obvious possible partnership, because we had worked together well on the Mongoliad, so I kind of knew it would work.
Thank you. I'm very glad that you offered, and I'm very glad I said yes.
Yeah, so am I.
This next question I really love, and then I just want to check in about timing, because I'm not entirely sure how much longer we should be going on with it. But this particular question is kind of cool, and we have not been asked before. How did you feel writing in the epistolary style affected your world building? What I love about that is that it definitely had an impact in two different ways, because we were always writing from a very specific point of view, never from an omniscient one. It allowed, if a character is writing about a time period other than their own, it allowed for obvious exposition without it being clunky, and also sometimes very funny exposition. So, for instance, in the first book, when Grania comes forward in time and sees sliding glass doors at a department store, she just thinks she's died and gone to heaven, and she can talk about it in a way that Mel or Tristan themselves would never talk about. Or more famously, when a bunch of Vikings come forward and discover Walmart, they describe Walmart the way no one else would ever have described Walmart. And then at the same time, if you want to sort of occlude stuff or just brush over them, you can just focus on only what matters to that writer, to that particular narrator. So it's a fun way, because it lets you cheat in ways that are good for the storytelling.
Yeah, it has a number of advantages, but a big one is that ability to rapidly jump over a lot of time. You've got a built-in, you feel a certain obligation, I guess, when you're telling a story in a linear fashion, to not do big jumps, so, well, what happens next kind of thing, on and on and on. And in an epistolary novel, you can just sort of end a section and jump ahead several days or several weeks or several months into a new setting, and just kind of move the story along quite a bit. So, like, we did that in Dodo, in the original novel, where one section kind of comes to an end, and then we jump forward quite a long time, quite a number of months, to just, it's a transcript of a congressional hearing, and all of these, or maybe it's a Senate hearing, but I think it's senators. They're all kind of talking about this organization, Dodo, as a thing that really exists and is up and running and has a budget and internal politics and so on. So it was a way to really jump over several months of sort of sequential storytelling in a very short period of time.
Yeah. Yes. So, because it is 2 minutes to the hour, I would just want to check in with the, there we are.
Yes, hello. So we do have a bit of time. We normally give you guys 50 or 60 minutes off of the clock, but I know it's late in Ireland. We don't want to keep you up too late. So I figured the last two questions are just from me. So I figured a good one to wrap up on is you guys can pick either, have you read anything recently that you're excited about, or do you want to give us a teaser of things that you are working on next?
I have a novel coming out later this year, probably before the holidays, about climate change and geoengineering. And lately I've been enjoying the books of Joe Abercrombie, of historical fantasy writer who's prolific and extremely readable.
And I am working on something that's unlike anything I've ever worked on before. And I actually don't feel compelled to say anything more than that about it. And I am reading somewhat belatedly N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy and loving it. Really,
Both
yeah.
incredible books. Yep. Joe Abercrombie and N.K. Jemisin, both very good, popular picks at the store.
Great.
Well, thank you guys for joining us tonight, and thank you for bearing with all the technical difficulties. We're glad that we got them smoothed out for the event in time.
Thank
Just
you.
to wrap up,
Yeah, thanks for hosting it. It's
of
nice.
course.
Yeah, thank you.
And don't forget, everyone in the audience, thank you all for joining us too. You can purchase Masters of the Rebels.
Thank you all. Neal, thank you for pinch hitting while I was lost in space.
Oh, my pleasure.
Of course. And everyone, have a good night for the rest of the night. And thanks for joining. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
All righty. Bye.